Alone in his fishing boat, Mark spotted something unusual floating on the lake. A paper boat folded from a crisp $100 bill. Following a trail of identical money boats across the water, he reached an isolated shore where a glass bottle caught his eye. Inside was a hastily scrawled note and a name that made his blood run cold. If you'd like to hear more stories like this one, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. The peaceful lake reflected the early morning sun as Mark prepared his fishing gear. A lifetime fisherman, Mark cherished these quiet moments before the rest of the world woke up. The calm water, the gentle breeze, and the promise of a good catch made these mornings worth the early alarm. He had been coming to this same spot for over 20 years and knew every cove and inlet like the back of his hand. Mark's father had taught him to fish when he was just 6 years old, and now at 48, fishing had become more than just a hobby. It was his escape from the pressures of everyday life. His tackle box was meticulously organized, each lure and hook in its proper place. The small boat he used had been in his family for generations, lovingly maintained and repaired countless times. The town had changed dramatically over the past few years. Tourism had increased, bringing in money but also changing the character of the once quiet community. Development companies had bought up much of the lakefront property, replacing modest cabins with luxury vacation homes that sat empty most of the year. The biggest change had come when Robert Chen's development company moved in 3 years ago, buying up properties and forcing out families who had lived there for generations. As Mark cast his line into the still water, he thought about how different things were now. The fishing spots were more crowded on weekends, and some of his favorite areas were now off limits, marked as private property with threatening no trespassing signs. It was during this quiet reflection that something unusual caught his eye. A small object was floating near the shore, drifting gently with the current. At first he thought it was just trash. Tourists were always leaving things behind at the lake. But as it came closer, Mark realized it wasn't ordinary litter. It was a paper boat, perfectly folded and floating remarkably well on the surface. The unusual thing wasn't just its presence in the middle of the lake, but what it was made from. Mark reached out with his net and carefully scooped it from the water, trying not to damage the delicate creation. He stared in disbelief. The paper boat had been folded from a crisp $100 bill. Mark looked around, wondering if someone was playing a prank. The lake was deserted at this hour, with no one else in sight. Who would make a boat out of money and set it adrift? Was it some rich person's idea of a joke? He examined the unusual find, turning it over in his weathered hands. The creases were precise and intentional, clearly made by someone who knew what they were doing. The boat design was complex, not just a simple fold that anyone could make. As Mark carefully unfolded it to confirm it was real currency, he noticed something else. Another identical paper boat floating about 20 yards away. Curiosity getting the better of him, he started his small outboard motor and guided his fishing boat toward it. This second boat was also crafted from a $100 bill, folded with the same precise technique. Mark collected it and noticed yet another one further out on the lake. One could have been a mistake or a joke, but 3 identical money boats? Something strange was happening. The sun was climbing higher now, casting long shadows across the water. Birds called to each other from the trees surrounding the lake. Mark followed the trail of money boats across the water, collecting each one. They seemed to form a deliberate path leading toward the far shore, an isolated area where few people ventured. The eastern side of the lake was mostly undeveloped, with dense forest coming right down to the water's edge. It was an area Mark rarely fished, as the underwater terrain was treacherous for boats, with hidden rocks and fallen trees that could damage his propeller. After collecting 8 boats, $800 floating on the water, Mark's boat reached the far shore. The area was overgrown with tall reeds and thick brush, making it difficult to see if anyone had been there recently. Water lilies clustered near the edge, and dragonflies darted above the surface. He cut the engine and let his boat drift into the shallows, the bottom scraping gently against the sandy lake bed. The silence here was different, deeper somehow. No sounds of cars or people, just the occasional call of a loon and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Mark stepped carefully from his boat, securing it to a nearby tree with a length of rope. The ground was soft and muddy, his boots sinking slightly with each step. That's when he spotted something partially hidden among the reeds. A glass bottle, the kind that might hold an expensive spirit. Sunlight glinted off its surface, drawing his attention. It was sealed with a cork and seemed to contain something. Mark carefully pulled it from the water and examined it, turning it over in his hands. Inside were more folded $100 bills and a crude note. The paper was torn and dirty, and the message was written with what looked like charcoal or perhaps burned wood. Mark removed the cork with a soft pop and shook the contents into his hand, the folded bills falling onto his palm along with the note. He unfolded the paper, the creases stiff and weathered from being inside the bottle. The hastily scrawled message read, "Please help. Trapped in abandoned cabin." The handwriting was shaky, as if written under duress or in poor light. But it was the signature at the bottom that made Mark's heart sink. Robert Chen. Mark knew that name all too well. Robert Chen was a wealthy real estate developer who owned half the property in their small town. His face had been all over the local news for the past week after he had mysteriously disappeared. The police suspected kidnapping, but the case had gone cold with no ransom demands or leads. Some locals had even suggested that Chen had simply left town after his latest development project had faced significant community opposition. Mark pulled out his phone to call the police, but hesitated, the screen glowing in his hand. He knew Robert Chen, or rather, knew of his reputation. Just last month, Chen had publicly refused to help fund the local emergency rescue boat during a town hall meeting. Mark had been there watching as Chen stood up in front of everyone and declared that people should pay for their own rescue if they were careless enough to need one. The room had gone silent with shock at his callousness. Robert Chen had earned his fortune by buying affordable housing properties, evicting the tenants, and converting them into luxury condominiums that most locals couldn't afford. Mark's own cousin had been forced to move to the next town over after Chen bought his apartment building and tripled the rent. Chen was notorious for never contributing to community causes, despite his immense wealth. Some locals even joked that Robert wouldn't spend a dollar to save himself. Now it seemed Robert Chen needed help, and Mark had found his desperate message. Was this an elaborate hoax? Or was the notorious developer truly in danger? Mark debated what to do. He could ignore the message. Many in town might even thank him for it. But something about those paper boats troubled him. Someone had gone to great lengths to create a trail that would be found. They wanted Robert to be rescued, despite everything. Following his conscience, Mark secured his boat and decided to investigate. Beyond the reeds was an overgrown path that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Branches scratched at his arms as he made his way deeper into the woods. The forest was quiet, too quiet, creating an eerie atmosphere as Mark pushed forward. After about 10 minutes of hiking, Mark came upon a small clearing. There, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, stood an old hunting cabin. The windows were boarded up, and the door appeared to be secured with a heavy chain from the outside. This had to be the place mentioned in the note. Mark approached cautiously. Could someone be watching? Was this a trap? He circled the cabin quietly, looking for signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks in the mud suggested someone had been there within the last day or two. Standing near one of the boarded windows, Mark called out softly, asking if anyone was inside. A muffled response confirmed his suspicions. Someone was definitely in there. The voice was weak but recognizable as Robert Chen's. Without the proper tools to break the chain, Mark retreated to a safe distance and called the police. Within an hour, officers arrived and rescued Robert, who was disheveled and weakened but alive. What was happening? Robert explained that he'd been kidnapped by a former tenant who lost everything in one of his evictions. During captivity, he'd used emergency cash from his hidden pocket to create paper boats, a skill his grandfather taught him. The isolation changed Robert. He realized his greed had left him with no one willing to pay his ransom. After his rescue, he refused to press charges, instead funding the emergency rescue boat he'd previously opposed and converting properties to affordable housing. When asked why, Robert pointed to a framed money boat in his office. His life wasn't saved by wealth, but by a fisherman who helped someone known for never helping others. And you, what would you do if you found a distress message from someone known for their selfishness?